Hi, I'm Michael Wood with the Los Angeles Times, and I'm here with my colleague Randy Lewis, and we are here to talk about the 50th anniversary of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, the watershed Beatles album that's just getting a lavish new box set reissue. Randy talked to some of the people behind the box set. What's new here? What's the sort of impetus for this new box?
Well, beyond the 50th anniversary itself, the Beatles have opened up their archives in a way that they've never done before. It's the most ambitious reissue of a single Beatles album ever. And what they've done is they've given us a real deep look at the creative process that went into it, and also given us a new stereo remix that's created by Giles Martin, the son of their original producer George Martin, who has been involved in all latter-day Beatles reissues. And the reason for this is not just because it's a 50th anniversary, but because the original stereo version of this record that most people are familiar with and have listened to for the last 50 years was kind of created as an afterthought. The Beatles were really interested in the mono version of this record. That was the dominant music format at the time.
Right.
Stereo was an afterthought. And so just by way of comparison, the Beatles and George Martin spent 3 weeks mixing the mono version, and the stereo version was made in 2 days.
Oh, wow.
By a lot of the assistant engineers, and not with a whole lot of input from George Martin or the Beatles themselves. So that's what's important about this.
Now, does this is sometimes kind of the thing where, as an average listener, you sort of wonder, would I even notice these changes? I mean, you've heard this whole box set. Is this new mix, really something you can pick up on?
It's really striking in a lot of ways, and I think people who have listened to it closely at all will notice differences. There are some that are more subtle than others. There are some tracks where the Beatles messed with the playback speed in the mono version, and that wasn't carried over in the stereo version. So those will be some of the most obvious things. But to me, what happened was with the stereo version originally, it's kind of an awkward creation where vocals would get separated from the instruments and they'd be placed strangely. Not what the Beatles and George Martin would have done if they were putting a lot of time and attention into this. So my feeling is what Giles Martin has done is created the version that George Martin and the Beatles would have done if they had cared about stereo 50 years ago.
Well, so let's talk a bit about the impact of Sgt. Pepper. It's been called the best album of all time by Rolling Stone. It's in the Library of Congress's National Recording Registry. It was the only Beatles album to win the Album of the Year Grammy. I think it's clear in retrospect that it was capturing a moment. It's sort of a bridge album for the Beatles in some way between the early sort of very energetic rock and roll Beatles and the later real experimental stuff that we saw on the White Album and Abbey Road. For me, though, the songs aren't really as great as you find on a lot of the other Beatles albums. If we're just talking songs, I find a lot more energy and a lot more great catchy tunes on other records. What's your take? Where does Sgt. Pepper stack up for you?
For me, it's not my favorite album that I would say this is my favorite high watermark Beatles album. I think there are others that are stronger musically, and I would turn to Abbey Road, Revolver, Rubber Soul, maybe. But I think conceptually and structurally, this is important. It's important for the reason that the Beatles had stopped touring August 1966 because they just felt like they couldn't hear themselves. They were, I think, losing impact as musicians. So they said, we're stopping touring, we're just going to focus on making records and see what we can do there without the consideration of what we have to play live. So they were really trying to expand the boundaries of what they could do, and in turn what they wound up doing was expanding the boundaries of what pop music could be. So you see in these a lot of different types of songs. You'll have a She's Leaving Home, which only has a string octet and a harp on it. You have George Harrison's Within You Without You, which is really not just bringing the sound of Indian music into a pop album, but the structure of it as well. You have When I'm 64, which is this old-time British music hall song.
Yeah.
You have kind of garage rock with a really stinging Sgt. Pepper song, and then you have this glorious, epic finale in A Day in the Life. So structurally, they were really expanding on what pop music could be.
There you have it. Sgt. Pepper, back to here again in all of its splendor. This is Randy Lewis, Michael Wood with the LA Times. For more, you can go to latimes.com/music.